Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a mountain of fascinating information and distill it down to the essential, surprising truth. Now, today we're tackling a topic that seems utterly simple on the surface: cooking oils, the fats you find in a kitchen. But as we track the sources for this, we realize that the contents of a simple frying pan, specifically in the English royal court, are actually deeply intertwined with climate, with class, and centuries of high-stakes politics. So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We are tracking which fats were used in the English royal kitchens from the very earliest Middle Ages right up to today. We want to know when and maybe if the traditional north of European cuisine defined by animal fats ever really gave way to the south, the territory of olive oil.
And if we just look at the big picture right off the bat, here's the core fact we have to unpack. The English court, historically, used animal fats almost exclusively, and often in just astonishing amounts. Olive oil was a very, very late comer. For centuries, it was treated more like a rare medicine or a symbol of foreign luxury, certainly not a staple cooking fat.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Why was England so fiercely, dominated by animal fats so early on? Our modern idea is all about variety, but the sources point to these huge geographically driven reasons for this loyalty.
It's absolutely fundamentally about geography and climate. I mean, think about the physical reality of medieval England. It's cold, it's rainy. Olives just don't grow there. Not, well, if at all. So the entire native agricultural system was built on large cattle farming. This gave them an enormous, stable, and, reliable supply of fat, milk, and meat. At the end of the day, you cook with what you have, what's abundant, local, and reliable.
Right.
So this leads us to the primary fats that just ruled these kitchens during the Middle Ages and into the Tudor period. But I'm three main players, all from livestock. First, you have butter. That was the most basic, the most fundamental fat, used for flavor for light cooking.
Okay.
Second, beef tallow. That's the rendered hard cow fat. It was perfect for frying or preserving because it's so durable and has a high smoke point.
And the third one, which I think is so key to the texture of historic English cooking, is suet. Could you maybe define that for us?
Yes, suet is critical. It's the hard, dense fat from around the kidneys and loins of cattle or sheep. It's incredibly stable. It doesn't melt easily, which made it the essential ingredient for baking. It's what gave pies, puddings, all of that, their characteristic durability.
And flakiness.
Exactly. Tallow, suet, and butter. Those three were the absolute bedrock.
And it wasn't just about what was practical, was it? It was deeply social. I mean, animal fat was durable, it was incredibly energy dense, which mattered when you're doing intense physical labor. And it became this huge symbol of status. If you had meat and could afford to cook it lavishly in fat, you were doing very, very well.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are so clear that olive oil was framed as Mediterranean and therefore foreign.
Right.
It wasn't just a flavor preference, it was the food of a rival culture, a rival economy.
Local fat was power fat?
Precisely. It was the taste of British tradition, of prosperity. Anything else was, suspect.
So the Middle Ages established this currency of power, but to really get the sheer scale of this, we need to go to the 16th century, a time when this culinary preference literally shaped the body of the king himself. Let's focus on Henry VIII court, because the sources suggest this is the period where the English kitchen reached its absolute heaviest fat peak.
It's a fascinating era because the excess, it wasn't accidental. It was institutionalized. You have to remember, they're operating without modern refrigeration. So fat, especially tallow and butter, wasn't just for cooking. It was for sealing and preserving food.
So it wasn't just a dash of butter in the pan. The meat was likely swimming in it just to keep it from going bad.
Essentially, yes. Yeah. Drowned in it before roasting or preserving. But the most revealing part, as you said before, is the baking. We see in the court records that pies and pastries, they had to be tough. They had to withstand these massive, bustling feasts.
Right, they weren't delicate.
Not at all. They were specifically made with suet, not lighter fats, precisely to create that durable, satisfying, and incredibly caloric crust.
And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting the food history directly to, well, a very famous historical figure.
The sources draw a very clear, compelling link. Henry VIII's well-documented obesity is directly correlated with the palace kitchen's unwavering reliance on these high-density animal fats.
Oh.
I mean, think about his meals. Massive quantities of red meat roasted in butter, thick sauces enriched with tallow, and every single pastry, every dumpling encased in dense suet. He lived in a culture that, it rejected the light simplicity of continental vegetables. It preferred the heavy, satisfying richness of northern fats.
So it wasn't just what he ate, but how it was cooked. The fat was in everything.
Every single component. It paints a very rich, if not very healthy, picture of that Tudor table.
Yeah.
A fortress of northern fat.
So when does the South finally get a crack at this fortress? When does vegetable oil finally start creeping in?
It's a very slow, almost reluctant introduction. It begins during the Stuart and Georgian periods, so the 17th and 18th centuries. Change started, driven by new trade routes and a desire for novelty among the aristocracy, but it was very limited.
And were these oils coming in as culinary items or for something else?
A bit of a mixture, but rarely as a core ingredient. We see two new oils entering the court then. Of course, olive oil makes an appearance, but in tiny quantities. And importantly, almond oil, which was used for luxury sweets or, crucially, for medicinal purposes, as a tonic or even as an external balm.
So if the Stuarts and Georgians were so keen on trade and novelty, why wouldn't they have just adopted something like olive oil instantly? Why treat it like a curiosity?
Well, it was a mix of taste, logistics, and cost. Yeah. Butter was cheap, it was reliable, it was available locally in huge volumes. Olive oil, on the other hand, had to be shipped across Europe. It incurred high tariffs, and it often arrived rancid. The quality was all over the place, and the cost was just exponentially higher.
So it wasn't practical for a working kitchen.
Not at all. And this is the key detail. Olive oil was not adopted as a primary cooking or frying fat. It never replaced the butter in the stock pots. Its uses were really restricted. Maybe a finishing oil for a delicate sauce, often as a medicine, or even for skincare.
It was a luxury item.
Exactly. The sources are emphatic.
What?
It was present, it was expensive, but it was not the kitchen king. It was an imported guest that kept to the drawing room.
That really solidifies its outsider status. Okay, so how does that change when we hit the massive expansion of the British Empire at the Victorian age?
Well, the Victorian age brings industrialization and, critically, colonialism. This dramatically increased the diversity of fats available to the palace, but from global sources that completely bypassed the Mediterranean.
Okay.
Butter and beef fat are still holding the fort. They were still defined as the taste of English quality. But suddenly we see coconut oil arriving from the colonies, and even palm oil. Initially, palm oil was mostly for non-culinary things, soap, candles. But as supply increased and refining got better, it gradually found its way into the kitchen.
So the selection gets broader, but it's still influenced by what the empire could source cheaply, which was often tropical fat, not Mediterranean.
That's the critical point. Even with all this new global variety, olive oil still played a distinctly secondary role in the palace kitchen throughout the Victorian era. The northern tradition was so entrenched, they were happier to import fats from thousands of miles away, like coconut, than to swap out their butter for the expensive, highly flavored oil of southern Europe.
The fortress held strong.
It did.
Okay, we've tracked hundreds of years of animal fat dominance. Now we come to the real tipping point, the 20th century, specifically post-World War II. What finally broke the hold of animal fat?
It really required a perfect storm of factors that eroded the foundations of that northern kitchen. First, and very tangibly, you had the acute shortages of animal fat and the national rationing systems during and after the World Wars.
Right, so necessity.
Exactly. Suddenly, domestic animal fat wasn't abundant anymore. People were forced to look for alternatives, and industry scaled up vegetable oil production dramatically.
Necessity forced open the door.
It did. But what kept it open was the second factor, the rise of scientific nutrition. The research into public health and, importantly, the influence of the Mediterranean diet starting in the mid-20th century, all of a sudden those traditional northern fats were being framed not just as heavy, but as actively unhealthy.
So the health factor finally gave vegetable oils the cultural legitimacy they'd been lacking for centuries. It finally shed that foreign medicine label.
It did. And the result is that olive oil finally gained a healthy and acceptable label in the court.
And this feels like a huge, but traditional British dishes never abandoned butter, did they?
Absolutely not. The soul of the original kitchen was just too resilient to be completely replaced.
Which brings us to today.
It does. Today, the royal kitchen operates with this perfect duality. It reflects centuries of history layered over modern health consciousness. You have two distinct approaches side by side. First, you have the traditional royal meals, the ceremonial cooking. That still relies heavily on butter and animal fat, especially in baking and sweets.
And the second approach?
The modern and health-focused menus. They use high-quality olive oil for pan-frying and dressings. But, and here's a crucial detail that links back to that whole North-South conflict, they also heavily use rapeseed oil.
Rapeseed oil. Why is that one so significant?
Because it's locally grown. It's now one of the UK's most important crops, and the sources suggest it's often framed internally as the English olive oil. It provides a healthier fat source that still holds on to that tradition of local sourcing, of English identity. It's the monarchy's way of adopting modern health trends without completely relying on Mediterranean imports.
That is an incredible encapsulation of the ongoing tension. We saw this reflected throughout Queen Elizabeth II's reign, didn't we?
We did. The palace kitchen under her direction was all about moderation and quality ingredients. While overly fatty foods were avoided, the fact remains that a British kitchen without butter was, and still is, culturally and functionally impossible.
Butter remains the bedrock.
Always. Especially in pastries. It's the marker of quality.
So, if we synthesize this entire history, animal fats were dominant for nearly 1,000 years and only moved to a truly balanced dual kitchen usage today because of global war and scientific necessity.
And that leads us to the definitive conclusion from our sources. Despite the rise of global oils, despite the acceptance of olive oil, the soul, the core character of the English royal kitchen remains one thing.
Butter.
Butter. And let's dive into that character with a little piece of chef knowledge from the palace sources. In classic English cuisine, fat is used primarily for flavor. Sauce, on the other hand, is used for texture and balance. That distinction is critical.
So the richness comes from the fat itself.
Yes. Think about a rich, buttery sauce or a suet pudding. The fat provides the fundamental character. This is so different from, say, French or Italian cuisine, which often gets its defining character from the light, fragrant notes of olive oil.
That really crystallizes the whole discussion. So the final takeaway is this. The English palace remained northern regarding fat. Animal fat is the tradition. Vegetable oil is the modern and sometimes reluctant adaptation.
That's it, exactly.
It's just incredible to think about the history lying just beneath the surface of a simple scone. This wasn't just about flavor. It was a history of trade, climate, and national identity, all played out in the pantry.
It does raise an important question, though. Consider that modern adoption of rapeseed oil, that conscious framing of it as the English alternative. It reflects a continued desire by the palace to manufacture an identity that balances modern health trends with that deep-seated need for tradition. They may use olive oil, but they still feel they need their own signature vegetable oil.
Absolutely. And as you go about your day, we want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over. Consider how national climate and geography dictate not just what we eat, but the subtle, defining character of an entire culinary tradition, exemplified by the enduring and non-taboo history of butter in the monarchy.
That climate-based tradition is much harder to erase than any fleeting health trend.
Until next time.